here promptly on this early morning. Thank you very much for being here. As delegates to and registered members of the Democratic Party, we here in the Children's Caucus with the Environmental Caucus, we have a great interest in children's issues. Today, we look at where and how those issues interact with environmental factors. Joining us to discuss some of the ways science can look at these problems is David Gonzalez from the UC Berkeley School of Public Health. Dr. Gonzalez has led research for several years on the health effects in humans of oil and gas exploration. He's joining us today to discuss how we know that living near these oil or gas wells is harmful and why a policy like, say, a 3,200-foot setback is protective of public health, particularly for children. Thank you very much for being here, Dr. Gonzalez. I'm sorry, you're still muted.
Hello.
There you go.
You can hear me now?
Yep, thank you.
Great, and I have 10 minutes, yes?
Please, and then we have time for we have 15 minutes total, but I thought I'd leave a little space for questions, but if you need to take it, go for it.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of materials here I'd love to share, and I will get through what I can and make sure I'm not going too fast. Well, yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm an assistant professor at the UC Berkeley School of Public Health, and I've been working about this issue of oil and gas and how it impacts public health for a long time, the past 7 years. Just want to show this is what it looks like from the sky. This is the city of Oildale, just north of Bakersfield. In the west, we have communities, schools, neighborhoods. In the east, the Kern River oil field, which is the 5th largest oil field in the United States. And this is what it looks like from the ground. So we estimate that in California, over 1 million people live within 1 kilometer. That's that 3,200-foot setback that's been proposed under, well, actually was passed into law a few years ago and is now up for reanalysis or evaluation by the voters in the referendum. Most of these people, most of the oil and gas wells in the state are in Kern County and Los Angeles. And Los Angeles, in fact, is the US city with the most urban oil wells. So there's been a lot of research on this topic, not just me, lots of other folks been looking at oil and gas and how that's impacting health, starting with the hydraulic fracking boom about just over a decade ago. And most of these studies have found that living near oil and gas wells is associated with higher risks of, a lot of folks have looked at birth outcomes, partially because it is we have good data on birth outcomes, and it's we know where people live at the time of delivery. Just want to talk really briefly about one of the health studies that I did, and actually, given the time, I'm just going to skip over this, but I just want to get into briefly why we care about things like birth outcomes. And this is a group focused on children, and we're talking about infants here. Preterm birth is an outcome that we are really concerned about. It's delivery before 37 weeks. And it can increase risk of infant mortality and have long-term risks for infant health. So in our work, we've looked at, exposure to oil and gas wells, living near oil wells, and found that people living near oil wells have a higher probability or higher risk of having a preterm birth. I'm just going to skip ahead. I'll get to in-depth with one of our studies in a moment, but this is a different study that we looked at where we found that there were higher odds of preterm birth for people living near oil and gas wells in the San Joaquin Valley. And the risk was highest. So we're seeing racial disparities highest for births to Hispanic and Black people. And one of the reasons that we look at, and this is something that I know Sarah was very interested in, why we look at proximity to wells in terms of how we try to study this as epidemiologists is, a couple reasons. First, it's very difficult to, we need large numbers of people. We need large numbers of population data to try to understand when we're trying to detect an association or an effect. If we see an exposure and we see an outcome like preterm birth, it's rare enough that we need large numbers. And we collect data over, years or sometimes decades. Sometimes for hundreds of thousands, sometimes for millions of people. Measuring physical chemical exposures at the household or at the individual level for hundreds of thousands or millions of people over a decade is not really feasible for us. That is a tremendous amount of work. So what we do is we look at our people living near these wells, and we do the best job that we can. But I will be the first to admit, like, we are not measuring actual physical chemical exposures, but we think that living near oil and gas wells, another reason to not just look at the physical exposures is because there's so many of them. So drilling and operating wells has been found to emit a wide range of air pollutants and also contaminates water, contaminates soil, produces noise pollution and other stress. All of these things can cause preterm birth. So one study that I did want to get into, which is like the chemicals, how can we get a better idea of what are the chemical, potential stressors that are coming out of oil and gas wells? So in this study, we're interested particularly in looking at fine particulate matter. It's PM 2.5. You probably, if you haven't heard about this already, it's what's the primary component of wildfire smoke. We're also interested in ozone. These are two air pollutants that are routinely monitored and that we know can cause preterm birth. And in the study, we wanted to see, does drilling wells or increasing production at these wells result in higher concentrations downwind of these air pollutants? And at what distance do these pollutants kind of go away or decay to background level, which means that you can't detect higher levels than there were from other sources. So for this study, we used data from across California. There's a network of air quality monitors that are the gold standard monitors maintained by the state agencies, federal agencies, and we got data from over 300 of these for over 1 million daily measurements between 2006 and 2019. So each triangle on this map is an air monitor. And you can see there's a lot of overlap between air monitors in places where wells are drilled or where they're producing. And I'm just going to skip past that. There's a bit of technical language here because I'm going to skip this slide too. But essentially what we wanted to look at was, can we come up with a natural experiment? We can't, the other problem with doing environmental epidemiology is I am not allowed, nor would I ever want, to randomize pregnant people or babies to receive pollution. We don't do randomized controlled trials, but we still have very important questions to ask. And, one thing that we try to do is find a natural experiment, something out there that we didn't manipulate, but is like random enough so that we can take advantage of it to try to generate some knowledge. So for us, for this study, we thought that a good example would be this case of a air monitor with wind direction changing in a way that we don't think is any way associated with where wells are being drilled or other sources of pollution nearby. People don't look at the wind direction when they decide to go for a drive. Oil operators are not looking at the wind direction, as far as I'm aware, when they're deciding whether to drill. So we can look at daily variation of what direction the wind is blowing. And then what we did, so for this air monitor right here, and let's say this is real data from a real day in 2009, July 2009. On that day, the wind was blowing from the northwest. And each X here is a well that was being drilled on that day in 2009. So we saw, within a few kilometers, each of these little donut rings is 1 kilometer across, about 3,200 feet. There were a few wells being drilled upwind and several other wells downwind. So we did this for each of those air monitors, those 300 and something air monitors across the state, million plus daily observations. And for each of those days and monitors, we measured how many oil wells were upwind within 1 kilometer, 1 to 2 kilometers, 3 to 4 kilometers, etc. And then we used a statistical approach where we're comparing each monitor to itself. What does that give us? That gives us the ability to say, like, hey, there's things that are going to change between regions, so if we're comparing a monitor in downtown LA versus a monitor in rural Kern County, there might be other things going on there. So let's compare monitors to themselves. And then we also controlled for other things just by design. We said, let's compare monitors to themselves in the same season and within the same year. But just on days when the wind was and was not blowing from where these wells are. And then we adjusted for other things we know can impact air pollution concentrations like rain, temperature, wind speed, presence of smoke. And that gave us an estimate on the other side of all this analysis, an estimate for what is the additional added effect of drilling one new well or increasing oil and gas production by 100 barrels, which is about the average across California. Let me show you these results and then I'll open it up for questions. So here's the plot just to walk you through what we're about to see. In the y-axis, there's PM 2.5 concentrations. That's the standard unit of measurement. Studies have found that an increase of as small as 1 microgram per meter cubed can increase risks for adverse health impacts of chronic exposures. The daily limit from the EPA is 35, annual limit's 9. So if you have these wells that are being operated for a long time, it can add up. And then we estimated what is the effect of drilling one additional well, 0 to 1 kilometers, 1 to 2 kilometers, 2 to 3 kilometers, etc., upwind of these monitors. And you can think about the monitor as a surrogate for a home. And what we found was increasing concentrations of air pollution upwind, when wells were being drilled upwind. No estimate for 0 to 1, it's a natural experiment, so we didn't have enough wells within 1 kilometer of our monitors. But what we did have was what we felt was a pretty confident estimate that there were higher concentrations of PM2.5 as far as 3 kilometers away. How can I feel more confident about that? Well, we also looked at monitors that were downwind of these wells, monitors that we did not think could contribute air pollution. Wells that were downwind of the monitors we thought would not contribute to the air pollution. This is a placebo test. And when wells are being drilled downwind of these monitors, we didn't see any increase in the concentration of these pollutants. That gave us some good confidence that what we're seeing was indeed like a true causal effect here. We saw similar things for other air pollutants, and that gave us some confidence that these studies that are looking at whether living near wells is increasing risks for adverse health outcomes. What could be the physical pathway, the physical chemical pathway? Well, these pollutants could account for it. So like I said, not just me, lots of people working on this issue. This scientific advisory panel, hired by the state of California, wrote a report that I contributed to. In that report, they concluded with a high degree of certainty that living near oil and gas wells within 1 kilometer causes higher risk of adverse birth outcomes, so preterm birth and low birth weight, and affects respiratory health. What can we do about this? Well, in another paper, my colleagues and I said, well, there's a few different ways to think about it. The most protective thing from public health perspective, completely eliminate new wells or existing wells. Second most effective, reduce or create a setback or a buffer zone between oil, gas wells and homes. Why? Why can't we just wear PPE like masks? There's so many hundreds of types of chemicals, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to filter them all out in the home. So we need setbacks in order to be health protective. That policy was approved by the legislature after a sustained effort a few years ago and signed into law by Governor Newsom and has been challenged and is up for vote this November. Happy to continue talking about any of this stuff. I know I have a few minutes for questions. So let me see if there's anything in the chat here.
We have no questions in the chat, but if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand.
Denise?
Thank you. Can you explain, first of all, thank you for that presentation. I'm very upset now, as I usually am. Could you tell me what you meant by the governor wrote, there was a challenge to the, what do you mean at the end, very end, you said there was a challenge to the bill?
Yes, so Senate Bill 1137 was passed by the state legislature in fall of 2022. That was after 3 efforts led by community advocacy groups, which I was contributing to at the time. And it took 3 times to get out of state Senate committee before this sort of setback bill, which would create a 3,200-foot buffer. So this bill creates a 3,200-foot buffer between sensitive receptors, and what that means is things like homes, schools, medical facilities, playgrounds. So many other states have them, including states like Texas, states like Oklahoma, states like West Virginia have these policies in place in a more stringent fashion than California right now. So these are pretty widely used methods that we think scientifically are effective. Um, so that was passed, signed into law, and then groups aligned with the oil and gas industry collected a petition, led a petition drive, and paid $8 million to gather enough petition signatures so that this would go to referendum. So I like to think about this because I've been working this space for several years now as a bit of like a chess match. And it seems like the counter move to this referendum being passed was this tactic, which has effectively resulted in a delay of the implementation of the law. Uh, Operators are still allowed to drill wells within, essentially within a few hundred feet of schools and homes, and will be able to unless and until this referendum is passed in November to retain the law.
Okay, so November is the vote this November.
This November on the
Oh
presidential
my
election.
God.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Get
yeah,
on
this
that.
is a $20 million.
And
Yes.
in fact, that is quite the perfect lead into our next speakers, because we're actually here to talk about that. If you have additional questions for Dr. Gonzalez, thank you. So interesting. And I'm sorry, because obviously there's several hours worth of material to talk about. Feel free to ask additional questions and we can pass them along or get you in touch. But right now, for the
Thank
next part of our program,
Gonzalez.
we're actually going to turn to activists and activism, as Dr. Gonzalez is talking about. So what you can do and what the threats look like, how to take effective steps to drive forward action that matters. R.L. Miller is no stranger to everyone here. For her long history of do something leadership, she's the chair emerita of today's CDP Environmental Caucus, a DNC member, a lawyer by training. She'll shepherd us through a discussion of these statewide campaigns around the Safe and Healthy California ballot measure that Dr. Gonzalez is talking about, youth climate strike, supporters of SB 252, and fossil fuel divestiture. Thank you, Dr. Miller.
Thanks so much for working with me to pull this program together, Sarah. I'm not a doctor. I am smart
Esquire.
enough to know to shut up and be impressed by actual doctors. And I really want to thank Dr. Gonzalez. That was incredibly helpful. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a panel. And I think for Zoom purposes, it's probably best to not spotlight because we're going to have several different speakers here, but I wanted to briefly introduce all of the different speakers. We've got Emma Weibel, an intern with San Diego 350 and the lead of the nonprofit's Youth versus Oil campaign. Sophia Carrasco, also the lead of Youth versus Oil's resolutions team, which works to pass a resolution at various city councils. Heidi Bravo, a public school teacher of 30 years standing, living in Southeast Los Angeles, environmental community activist, labor union leader. I have not met you yet, but it sounds like you and I will get along very well. Denise Robb, who I know well from the SB 252 campaign, professor of political science at Pierce College, member of Los Angeles Community College District Sustainability Institute, serves on the COPE political campaign for her union, AFT 1521, a Dem delegate to the California Democratic Party, and a vegan. Isabel Duvan Schwartz, excuse me, Bay Area native who moved to Southern California to earn her teaching credentials from Cal State Long Beach, currently a community organizer and substitute teacher for grades kindergarten through 12. That's multitasking. Greg Fritchley, 21-year Children's Caucus member, 30-year child welfare social worker, and 5-time Democratic candidate for the Assembly. Amanise Sanate is a school counselor, California Dem Party Ybor delegate from AD 61, longtime activist for social justice, engaging causes from libraries to safe environments. That's a lot of people. And I guess I'm just going to ask any one person to just start speaking on what they would like to talk about. I see Emma and Sophia first up, perhaps. And please excuse me, folks, I sort of ran through everybody's biographies very quickly because we've got a lot of awesome people here. Emma and Sophia, you want to tell us what you're doing in the way of activism?
Yeah, I think that would be great. Definitely Dr. Gonzalez already ran through a lot that we are going to talk about, but we can kind of reiterate it with some extra details and that sort of stuff. So, as Dr. Gonzalez has outlined, living near an oil well is obviously extremely dangerous for all people, but especially children. Now, his statistics said that 1.1 million Californians live within 3,200 feet of an active oil well, but most of our sources have said around 2.7 million. So I'm not sure about that discrepancy, but we might want to, either way, regardless, that's millions of Californians exposed to daily doses of pollutants that threaten their lives. And BIPOC communities, people of color, are especially affected by this neighborhood drilling, with 92% of people who are living near these sites and are the most impacted by these pollutants are the people who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Additionally, as you all know, oil drilling is one of the main causes of climate change, an issue that threatens all our lives, but especially those of future generations on every level. Climate change is a health issue, a human rights issue, an economic issue, an infrastructure issue, and most importantly to this caucus, a children's rights issue. The most important right we can guarantee for our children is the right to grow up in a healthy environment. So the question then becomes, how do we do that? Now, Senate Bill 1137 is definitely a critical piece in this puzzle. It requires 3,200-foot setbacks, which is around half a mile, a little bit over, between any new wells and schools, homes, hospitals, and other sensitive receptors, so anywhere where people live. And furthermore, it enforces stricter regulations on existing wells, something that is currently severely overlooked to the detriment of these vulnerable communities and the future of our children as a whole. And these regulations include plugging the wells that are deemed idle, so the wells that don't actually serve a function currently, which is estimated to create 24,000 direct and indirect jobs and prevent the overlooked pollution that these abandoned wells cause. This goes in tandem with a lot of other laws that will hopefully be passed in the future regarding idle wells specifically. And overall, this common sense law was passed in the Senate, Assembly, and was signed by our very governor in 2022, which begs the question of why we are still fighting for it. So, as Gonzalez summarized, when the oil industry found out about this legislation, they spent over $20 million on a deceptive signature gathering effort based on the false assertion that this health buffer zone would heighten gas prices and cause other unrelated issues. However predatory the means, these were unfortunately enough signatures to force a referendum on the law on the 2024 ballot, where it is now up to our state's citizens to vote on whether to keep or overturn this legislation. This undemocratic act is devastating, and it continues as these corrupt campaigns spent $16 million in 2023, $60 million. But it's not the end. We have faith that with the right education and awareness, California will vote to keep SB 1137, and its benefits will be implemented once and for all. Now, I'm going to pass this on to Emma, who can go over for more specifics about what our organization is doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sophia. So, what does Youth v. Oil have to do with all of this? Well, before SB 1137 was even on the docket, our campaign focused on getting local city councils and organizations to endorse a campaign to stop new oil permits, drop existing ones, and roll out 3,200-foot setback zones. So stop, drop, and roll. Our activism alongside frontline community leaders, which have been leading the charge on oil drilling setbacks for over a decade, as well as so many other statewide organizations and peoples, helped lead to SB 1137. So we were elated when it passed and heartbroken, but more importantly, very angry when it was unjustly overturned. This past year, Youth v. Oil, which is the organization that Sophia and I are a part of, or the campaign, at least in the campaign that I am the lead for, our main focus has been building a movement in support of keeping the law. We've passed resolutions endorsing it through 5 local city councils here in San Diego County, as well as getting an endorsement from the state Democratic Party at the executive board meeting earlier this year, which is where I had the pleasure to address this caucus for the first time. Through presentations, resolutions, voter education, and more, we worked tirelessly to let people know what is at stake with this referendum. the basic right to growing up, raising a family, and going to school in a place where toxins aren't constantly threatening your health. Labor and environmental justice groups teamed up last year to change the language on referendums, and I know this was kind of talked about a bit in the chat, so that you can either choose to keep or overturn the law. The process is as clear and easy as ever, thus the chance to make our state more livable is at all of our fingertips. Y'all are part of this caucus because you care about children, and we're children telling you that this is where we need your support. This is where we need you, people able to vote, and citizens whose voices are respected far more than ours, to take a stand. Remember to vote KEEP on SB 1137 in November, and tell everyone you know to do the same. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak, and I hope you learn more about the referendum as well as our campaign, and we're very happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Next up, Greg, you're near the top of the screen. How would you like to talk about your activism?
Okay, hi, my name is Greg Fritchell, and I'm in Assembly District 56, and what we're dealing with right now is a direct environmental threat in our Assembly District. That people who are, I don't know how many people here are familiar with the whole debacle regarding the Exide battery recycling facility southeast of downtown LA in the city of Vernon. That facility has it's costing taxpayers millions of dollars now to clean up because the company basically abandoned it. And all of the customers who were taking their batteries to Exide are now taking them to a facility in the city of Industry in my assembly district called Ecobat, formerly known as Quimeco. They are claiming that they are doing the process much cleaner than Exide did, which is really interesting considering that they've been found in violation of 29 environmental regulations, several of which they still haven't corrected. They've been operating without a permit now for 9 years, a hazardous waste permit. I've been working with a local group called the Clean Air Coalition of North Whittier and Avocado Heights. And they are partnered with a legal organization that some of you may be familiar with called Earth Justice. And they've been fighting against the efforts of Ecobat to get their hazardous waste permit renewed. And they actually want to expand, and they're actually applying to the South Coast Air Quality Management District for that expansion. We want that denied as well. What I've done is I've written a resolution that essentially mirrors the language of what they are asking for, which is those two things I've already mentioned, the denial of those two permits, and a timeline for shutting the facility down. It's been there for approximately 65 years. We've talked about fossil fuels. Here we're talking about lead smelting, and that process is very dangerous as well, not only releasing lead particulate matter, but also hexavalent chromium and arsenic and other compounds. We're talking about not just PM 2.5, but also some PM10 matter. So anyway, what I did, as I said, was I wrote a resolution that essentially is asking for the facility to eventually be shut down in addition to denying these permits. And it was passed by my Democratic club, the Tri-Counties Club. Unfortunately, I run into a hurdle with the LA County Resolutions Committee. They voted it down after hearing from Teamsters. That was the one labor voice that we had speaking on this. And unfortunately, they are on the side of the company. They are delivering some of the materials to their facility, and they're concerned about the effect on their jobs. I've talked to them about the effect of exposure to these things on their health, on their drivers and their members' health, but they don't seem to be wanting to hear it. And we do need to hear from, what we do need to hear from is teachers and classified employees, because there are, in addition to being several high concentrated residential neighborhoods very close to the facility, there are also several schools. And so obviously we're concerned about the effect of exposure to these toxins on children. Lead, we know that the risks of lead, one of which is reduction in cognitive function. So, we're talking about some effect here. So I intend to reintroduce the resolution, but I'm going to have to modify the language. But I'm going to need help. I need help from. I need the voice of teachers. I need to show that the Teamsters are not the only labor voice, and we need to protect children that they teach, and we need to protect the local residents. This is an area that is similar to the area surrounding Exide. It's heavily working class, a high concentration of people of color, primarily Latino and Asian residents. So this is what we're working on right now, and I'd be happy to answer questions as best I can in regards to it.
Okay, we do have a lot of people, a lot of speakers, and so if people have questions, please raise them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them. But in the meantime, while people are typing, I want to turn it over to ID Bravo, who has raised her hand.
It's interesting that, Greg, you talk about Exide. I was actually one of the early members that brought awareness about Exide and the dangers. Because my school, Maywood Elementary, is literally within a mile of Exide, right? I was raised in Maywood. My father worked in the Vernon area. It's all industrial. Very sadly, we did lose our secretary to cancer, and now 2 more teachers are battling. They had cancer some time ago, and now it's back. So they're going through that battle. So if you need help, just, let me know. I'm definitely willing to, go for, to help out as much as I can. Hello, everybody. My name is Aide Bravo. I'm a teacher in Maywood. I've lived in South area like pretty much all my life since 1974. Myself, along with 9 other staunch environmental community activists, began Cudahy Alliance for Justice, which filed a lawsuit against KIP SoCal because they wanted to build a school accommodating 1,200 students that was previously a metal foundry for 90 years. So you can imagine the toxins on the site. There were the arsenic level was 200 times what is deemed safe. The PCE levels were double of what are deemed safe. And for those who don't know, Cudahy is in District AD 64. It's not very far from downtown Los Angeles. I think we're like 4 miles out from southeast of downtown Los Angeles. The community is incredibly vulnerable. 25% of the residents live in poverty. So they're incredibly vulnerable. So we began our campaign to stop the construction of this school in the middle of the pandemic. It was actually to our benefit because we were able to Zoom. We discovered how to Zoom, and we were able to do that on a weekly basis. We got together every Monday, and we never let up for 2 years. We put pressure on the city council, on the Cudahy City Council, for allowing the construction to be permitted. And of course, KIP SoCal never we gave them an earful. We certainly gave them an earful. As part of the lawsuit, our lawyer gave us the green light to continue pushing back, because we thought we had to kind of lay back, but we didn't. We had to really continue putting the steam on everybody. We were a pressure cooker for 2 years. Eventually, KIP decided to abandon the project once the Los Angeles Superior Court judge deemed them to be guilty of not following CEQA requirements. And so the judge gave them a writ saying they cannot construct unless they do follow the requirements and they remedy the area. Well, they decided to abandon the area. It was just too much work for them, right? And so we were successful in that. Currently, they moved over to Walnut Park, which is more towards the south end, like south central, closer to that end, because that section is unincorporated, and it was just easier for them to build. There were no soil samples required. It was just, they had the right to build. And so that's what they're doing at the moment. And we're fighting back on that one as we speak. And I think, I never thought, I'm a union activist as well, and I know how to organize. I've been able to organize. Like I said, we stopped the Exide facility from functioning, right? I mean, it took many, many years, but we did it. And so with that experience, I was able to take on this case, and we were able to stop it because of organizing. And so grassroots groups like mine, Cudahy Alliance for Justice, are very, very important. Greg, you talked about having teachers, yes, that grassroots group is going to be key to ending the operation permanently for your community, as it was for us, and is as it was for us shutting down the project that KIP had planned. So we just move forward, right? We move forward, and we do what we can. And the reason I was so we're such staunch supporters of keeping this kind of construction out of our community is because we're from the community. We're here. We've always lived here, and we can't allow a conglomerate. KIP SoCal is a conglomerate. They are a national network of charter schools. They're one of their directors is Reed Hastings, who's the owner of Netflix, right? And so this is the kind of group that we're faced against. I'm not sure about Exide, but we were able to stop them over years. But KIP, because they're tied to such big money, that was our biggest fear when we went into the lawsuit. We're like, we're going to get reamed, but we thought, you know what? No. If we're starting from the ground, from the roots of our community, we're going to get support. Sure enough, we got so much support. We got so much support that the actual school that existed that was going to accommodate the students, it was called KIP Pueblo Unido. They closed after a year because there was just no support for it, because of what KIP wanted to do. And so you can get to the point where you've got you have such outreach. You have to have a lot of outreach, right, in your community. Cudahy is easy because it's only 1 mile radius. Maywood, where I work, is only 1 mile radius. We're pretty small towns, we're next to each other, or there's Bella between us, but we're all pretty close to each other. And so that's kind of how we were able to be successful. So I don't know if there are any questions. Mm-hmm.
This is great. This is really, truly inspiring. I think it's important that we speak out not just on the overall threat of oil and gas, but also on these, the really specific things that matters for people in the community. I want to turn it, if there's any questions, please type them in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Isabel Duvon. I hope I've got the name pronounced correctly this time.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen really quickly. All right. So it's interesting hearing, first off, can y'all see my slideshow? Is it showing on your screen, full screen? Okay,
Yes.
excellent. All right, so it's really interesting hearing both from Greg and Ide, because I had the opportunity to meet both of them when I drafted a resolution about industrial sites, former or current, being better neighbors to the surrounding communities. And what I'm experiencing here in Torrance, California is very similar. It's almost like just a common experience that we're all having, is these industrial sites being poor neighbors to the surrounding community to the detriment of our health. So a little background about myself. I live in Torrance, California. I live 1.9 miles away from the Torrance refinery and 8.3 miles away from the Valero Wilmington refinery. And in 2015, the Torrance refinery had an explosion so massive it registered as a 1.7 magnitude shake, and a 40-ton piece of debris landed within 5 feet of 50,000 pounds of hydrofluoric acid. Now, if this chemical had been released, it could have caused a mass casualty event, because hydrofluoric acid, modified or otherwise, when released to essentially room temperature air, causes a ground-hugging cloud that can drift with the wind, and it is one of the most dangerous chemicals because it is an acid that dissolves down to the bone. Now, thankfully, that didn't happen, and it was a close call. However, the Torrance and Wilmington refineries are the only two in California that use this chemical. All other refineries in California use any of the safer alternatives that don't pose the same risk to the surrounding community. So here we have a map based on both of these refineries' self-reported risk, which is interesting because the Valero Wilmington refinery actually has more hydrofluoric acid than the Torrance refinery, but reports a smaller radius. This also shows that when things aren't peer reviewed, you can just say anything. This information is reported by the refinery, but there's no peer review process. So the concern is these refining sites using a dangerous chemical that poses an inherent risk to the community. And similar to the sites that Ida and Greg mentioned, there are higher rates of cancer in our community, specifically north of the refinery in which the wind blows. And which is ironic because when you have a higher income community, these companies will spend tons of money to get a good reputation. After the Torrance refinery explosion, when PBF Energy then purchased the refinery from ExxonMobil, they spent who knows how much money on their PR department. They donate to everything in the community. They donate to all the local nonprofits, to city programs, to the school district, including to the American Cancer Society. So at our local Relay for Life event, the survivors tent said Torrance Refining Company over it. And there are safer alternatives. So because there's been a constant fight since the explosion to get this refinery and the Wilmington refinery to convert to any of the safer alternatives. We have tried with the South Coast AQMD board, but right before their decision, there was a board turnover. Right before their decision, there were some scandals that came out, and the new board decided not to pass the requirement that the refineries convert to a safer alternative. And we had our local assembly member, Al Marzouchi, propose legislation. But the issue isn't if you can get a legislator to try and propose legislation, it's if you can get support for it. And because there's so much big oil money in our local state and federal politics, it's just not feasible. That's what we're learning. Because of the money that they're pouring into lobbying, we're unable to get simple legislation passed to require a conversion to a safer alternative. There's only 2 of these refineries in California that use these chemicals, but a requirement to convert to a safer alternative would start the groundwork to requiring more requirements. You know, it would make it so that refineries and oil companies would have to be safer and be better neighbors. And that costs money. So instead of spending that money to be safer for the surrounding community, they instead spend it on lobbying. So these areas, the Torrance and Wilmington refineries, this is potentially outdated at this point, but they're surrounded by residential neighborhoods, especially the Torrance refinery around on all sides. That is residential. And right through the center of it is Crenshaw Boulevard, which is a commuter area, and they don't have air quality testing along that area because they consider that part of the refinery site, even though it is a public street. So here we have the Wilmington refinery right around here, and you see the schools around. Just to go back, this is the Wilmington refinery. Here's where they report it could be released in the event of a release of hydrofluoric acid. Same with the Torrance refinery. That's the refinery, and here are the surrounding schools. And you can see these neighborhoods going around. I live 1.9 miles away from it. And although the Torrance area, I could talk on and on about it. If anyone wants to learn more about this issue, please contact me because these self-reported numbers are small compared to what other refineries across the United States report when they have less hydrofluoric acid on site. So specifically, it's not just the immediate health effects that should be part of the discussion, even though that is one of the most important things. It's also what alarm systems are in place in the event of a release or spillage that could affect a community. So if there is an incident, how is the community notified to take shelter? And what are the long-term and short-term health impacts that could be experienced by communities? How can we ensure accountability and transparency? How can we ensure that information released from the refining companies is peer-reviewed? And who is willing to pass legislation? And more importantly, who is willing to support the proposed legislation? Because you need majority support in order to pass something. What chemicals are passing by countless communities? And how could a release or exposure affect those communities? Because that hydrofluoric acid doesn't just magically appear at the Torrance and Wilmington refineries. It's brought in by train, and that goes by a lot of underserved communities. And what are some safer alternatives to currently dangerous risks posed to those surrounding communities? And how can we ensure that it's safer? So I have some information that you'll get later. Please go to www.traa.website to learn more. The Torrance Refinery Action Alliance is a grassroots community movement. And we need all the support we can get to hold these refineries accountable, to make sure that they are being better neighbors, which is in line with the California Democratic Party based on the resolution that was passed. Thank you.
That's totally awesome. Again, really appreciate this. And I am trying to move us along. So next up, we're going to zoom out to California's pensions, and how your pension as a teacher is supporting the oil industry. And most importantly, what you can do about that. And for that, I'm going to have Denise Robb with a super timely update. And I'm just going to say briefly, everybody, please take a look at the chat, because we've got a really robust discussion happening in the chat. If you're not already looking at it, we're getting a lot of FAQs regarding the SB 1137 California versus Big Oil handled in the chat. So Denise, please take it away. And Denise, I will be dropping in the activism links relating to the hearing next week. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Denise, and I'm a professor at Pierce College and an activist and ADEM and all that. But we also have a sustainability committee. We have a sustainability institute for the Los Angeles Community College District. We're the largest district in the United States. We have 9 colleges. And we have a sustainability institute, and we have speakers all the time. We also work on embedding climate literacy into the classroom and teaching professors how to embed climate into any topic. At one of these workshops that we had, we learned about Senator Lena Gonzalez's bill, Senate Bill 252. And it's based on, when I was young, we had a divestment from South Africa movement, which was credited as being one of the ways we were able to end the apartheid system in South Africa. And it's based on that movement. Basically, the largest pensions in the United States are CalPERS and CalSTRS. Our teacher pension is CalSTRS, but other teachers have CalPERS, also government workers, firefighters, police. And we have over almost $15 billion invested in fossil fuels, and they're even reinvesting in fossil fuels. Now, they've divested from tobacco, from coal, but they do not want to divest yet. They just had a very long hearing, hours and hours, to try to stop this bill. And they said they're going to divest. Our own representative on CalSTRS said, don't do this bill, don't pass this bill. She says, by 2050, we will divest. Well, 2050 is 20 years later. This bill will divest by, it was 2030. We amended it to be 2031. And it gives you a little 5-year off-ramp in case there's some financial problem. But guess what we found? They did all of these studies, and it turns out we would have made more money in our pensions if we had divested 10 years ago from oil and gas. More money. So the way I've been starting the conversation with legislators is, you're hurting our pensions by not divesting, because the S&P, Standard & Poor, oil and gas used to be 30%, and now it's, as of April of this year, it's down to 4.1% of Standard & Poor's investments. So it's not a good investment. The problem is we have one assembly member in Inglewood, and if anybody's from that area, please contact Assembly Member Tina McKinnor. She's the head of the Public Employee Relations Committee. Last year, it passed the Senate. In fact, the only people who speaking out against it, we had like 100 people. The only people speaking out against it were the oil and gas lobby and CalSTRS and CalPERS board, because they said, no, we want to do it on our own time. So Assemblymember McKinnon put it on hold for a year. And we've been waiting a year. We've been getting support. And I want to show you some of the support. This will just take a second. I just made a list yesterday of all the support that we have. And of course, the California Democratic Party, the LA County Democratic Party, a lot of teachers' unions, every Democratic club, just almost everyone you could imagine. I've spoken to 20 or 30 groups. Every one of them has taken an almost unanimous or unanimous position in favor of it. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. So you can see we have support. We lobbied McKinnor's office yesterday, and I have a little picture for you of our lobbying. I brought students, professors, CalSTRS members, CalPERS members. We had children, and my union, AFT 1521. And basically we were told she wants to make sure there's enough support, and there's a new version of the bill. The new version of the bill, she said she will accept it with amendments, is the new version says that they'll divest by 2045. That is not what we were hoping for. That is not what we were asking for. But anyway, so the 19th is the hearing. We're flying to Sacramento, and we have buses, we have vans, we have carpool. If you want to go to Sacramento, and if you can't go to Sacramento, at least please call Assemblymember McKinnor's office, and I'll put the number in the chat. And I want to say one quick thing. Can you still hear me? Because I've lost my Zoom screen. I can't see you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. I don't know what happened to my screen, but I'm the new president of the PTA for my son's school. And I don't know, many people don't know that PTA is an advocacy, you probably know. It's an advocacy organization. It was formed to pass legislative priorities and advocacy for children. So they don't know that at the PTAs, but I'm going to bring up this bill in November that has to do with schools. It's a no-brainer, right? If you're involved with your PTA or you know anyone, get the PTA to hold programs, and they can endorse candidates, but they can do propositions very easily. And I'm going to have some programs at my college as well called Day of Politics, and we have people speaking on all the different propositions and legislation. So, somebody asked in the chat, like, how do you reach out to people that aren't part of our area? So I just wanted to throw that out there, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Folk, we have Almanisi has been waiting very patiently, and I didn't know that they had a hard stop at 10 o'clock. So I'm going to put them in for about 20 seconds while I type some additional activism links regarding SB 252 and try to address the question that Emma has raised. Thanks. Almanisi, take it away.
Hi, I'm Manisa Nati, she, her. I am so sorry. I am among experts here. I'm among a lot of people who know a lot more than me about all this stuff, but I just want to very quickly plug Project 2025 because I talk with people and there are still people who don't know about it. And basically, pick your interest. It's covered. And the plan is a climate disaster, as many people are saying. And there is no hope for anything that we've already advanced, any sort of programs that we have to help the climate, anything forward facing that's actually going to be serving the people, serving us, is going to be axed. And I think the most important thing to take of this is that all these experts who know all about the work, who have been serving on these commissions, serving on the boards, leading these different departments that are there to protect us, they will be removed. These lifelong public servants will be removed and replaced with right-wing conservative people that Trump hand selects, because that is the candidate at this point. That's what we can assume. And these are the people that are going to be making decisions that are going to be affecting all of our lives. So pretty much sums it up. Please look out there. Sierra Club has a nice little write-up that you can look at to see what to expect. But again, thank you all for your expertise. Thank you all for your work and doing the job to educate us here. I'm still learning, and I just really appreciate this, everybody coming together to discuss this. So please look it up, Project 2025. Thank you very much, RL. I yield my time.
No problem. Thank you very much for the speed. Yeah, Project 2025 is sort of the flip side of my talk. And folk, we are approaching time, and I'm gonna give you a very brief. I think it's always important to end on a note of hope. Because Project 2025 is the scary stuff of if Trump wins. But I want to talk briefly, very briefly, because we're running over, on the good stuff that happens, especially if Biden gets reelected. If you know me at all, you know I've been going around the state giving talks on the Inflation Reduction Act and how awesome it is, but I want to focus in particular on two programs that will be of great interest to school board folk. First one is direct pay, and the second one is electric school buses. Electric school buses are awesome. That's almost all you need to know. Most of you guys probably know about direct pay as or most of you know that the Inflation Reduction Act has some sort of benefits where if you buy a solar panel or you buy an electric car, you get a tax rebate, right? You get a tax credit. But if you're a school board, you don't pay taxes. And so if you want to put a solar panel on your home, you get a 30% tax credit. Well, the Inflation Reduction Act basically gives the school board a 30% tax credit for putting, except instead of a tax credit, it's in the term of free money. I hope I have your attention when I say free money. And I'm going to be focusing on school boards because that's the audience here. But this program called Direct Pay is also available to 501c3s, which is to say community foundations, you know, the Ventura County Social Justice Community Foundation, groups like domestic violence shelters, library boards, churches, synagogues, mosques, places of worship, and native tribes. So this is available to a lot of organizations that don't pay taxes. Instead, they will get rebates for the money that they spend from the IRS. Again, the name of this program is Direct Pay. And Sarah found a couple of links on the White House website that are 184 pages long. Don't read them. Instead, I'm going to drop a link into the chat that is put out by the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. The person who is currently staffing this is used to be this energy and environment staffer for Bernie Sanders. And she is evangelical on the subject of direct pay, and she's given me the bug, if you will. She's made me equally enthusiastic. And so I'm doing my best to let every person who volunteers at a community organization, every person on a school board, everybody who is active in volunteering, to please be aware of direct pay. The IRS is handling it. There's a lot of IRS forms and it's very bureaucratic, and that's why you should please focus on the link, start with the links that I've given you. But what you need to remember is free money, free rebates after you spend the money to put the solar panels on your community, after you upgrade your library to be a cooling center, after you put in school gardens, you apply to the IRS and you get a check. This is a non-competitive grant, meaning that if you ask, you will get. The second link that I'm going to drop into the chat, and I'm making this very brief, is simply EPA Clean School Bus. EPA is running two different programs for school buses. First program is through the direct pay, and the second one is more the competitive grant. And this is the 200 school districts apply and 10 get. And so you have to do a little bit more, but this way you don't have to shell out the money up front, which matters for some of the school bus programs. Please sign up for the links that you will find on the EPA website. This stuff is not easy to navigate, but they are dropping new programs. They're done with 2023. They're now open for 2024. And when they say HD means heavy duty vehicles. What they mean is school buses. So you always have to wade through EPA slog when you're doing these things. That's more or less the 30-second talk of why the Inflation Reduction Act is so awesome, with a focus really on school boards. Sarah, if you can just drop my contact info, and if you're interested in having me talk to your Dem Club on more that the Inflation Reduction Act means for you and your community, I can also talk about what it means for American manufacturing, what it means for Joe Biden's reelection, and what it means for you personally. I've given 20 plus of these talks. I've got one tomorrow and another one later on this week. So yeah, and finally, I just wanted to sort of catch my breath and say thank you all. I know that we are running over, and turning this back over to our awesome chair, Sarah.
Thank you very, very much, everybody, RL, for stimulating this, and everyone for sharing the wonderful work you're doing. Obviously, we can be doing this for hours. And I think that the transcript we've generated with links will be really helpful for people. I don't have much more to say other than the organizing sort of rule of thumb, which is reach out to 5 people and get each of them to reach out to another 5, and just keep going and see what we can do. I think there are many people on this chat who are Assemblymember McKinner's constituents or near constituents, so I think it's a good place to go for help in that regard. And I would just ask you to stay in touch, check out the Children's Caucus, check out the Environmental Caucus. We have emails in here if you need them, and we will post this on our YouTube website. And so I think that we're officially adjourned, but if